So I just want to begin by welcoming everybody. As Leah said, Rabbi Mühlstein said, this was a call that began as a bit of a cri de coeur from rabbinic colleagues, really, about how we think about what's going on in Israel, with what's going on with the new government, and how that impacts on our members and our movement, both within Israel and also the effect on the diaspora with our conversions, our rights of return, our women who want to pray at the wall with a talit, whatever it might be. We're delighted that our partner, the EUPJ, our parent body, if you like, was also very interested in joining with us on this, and that the IMPJ, Anna and Gilad, with the facilitation of Rabbi Mühlstein, have pulled all this together within a very short space of time. So thank you, everybody, and welcome. I'm now going to mute myself, and we'll start off. I think Gilad has a fairly short window, so we're going to begin. Just Gilad, if you could begin by kind of setting us the context, and we'll go on from there.
Okay, so Erev Tov, good evening, good afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many people in this webinar. Many of the names and faces are familiar, and Shalom Chaverim, hello friends, and some names and faces are new, and I'm sure I'm speaking also on behalf of Anna, when I'm saying that we rejoice in the fact that so many colleagues and friends are interested in the challenges we face today in Israel, and we are encouraged by your partnership and friendship. Allow me first to say that I feel the need to mark the loss of a dear friend, Ruth Cohen, that was the president of the EUPJ and the president of the chair of the EUPJ and the chair of the World Union. Ruth was, together with her husband Harvey, a very close friend of our Israeli movement and a great supporter of our educational enterprises. Now, look, you know, in recent years, when I led the movement, before Anna took this serious responsibility upon herself, we had many occasions in which I shared with you deep concerns and deep hopes in regard to the situation in Israel. And in many of my past meetings with friends from overseas congregations, I said that like many other countries and societies, Israel is in a very critical stage of shaping its core values. I always mention the fact that in the first few decades, the founding fathers and mothers of our country were fully occupied with the need to build the country and to defend itself. And it enabled us not to address some key ideological issues. And again, like many other Western societies, and also, you know, past eras of our nation, at the age of 75, we are called to deal with the core values of our nation. And in order to understand the current real challenge, and I even want to say the current dramatic challenge we face today, we need to say something about the political background. Israel is led today by a government which is an ultra-right, ultra-conservative government. We don't have in the current coalition led by Prime Minister Netanyahu any moderate political player from the center. And this is a huge difference between the current Netanyahu government and coalition and his past governments and coalitions. Netanyahu always wanted at least one political player and partner from his left side that will enable him to balance the demands that are coming either from the ultra-Orthodox parties when it comes to issues of religion and state and gender equality and things like that, and the demands from the more ultra-right forces, the settlement movements and their representatives in the Knesset. This is the first time Netanyahu is leading a government in which he is the most moderate player, and I'm putting aside is, legal issues and the criminal procedures that he faces, talking only ideology. Unfortunately, and this is definitely a result of his legal issues, but also the result of his decision a few years ago to take a sharp turn to the right. And we know that there are some similarities in European countries and even in the US and in other countries in Latin America. Israel is facing challenges that are shared by other Western democracies around the world in recent years because of the legal issues with Netanyahu and because of his turn to the right. The Israeli society is deeply, deeply divided today between two political blocs. And we do not ignore the fact that the results of the last elections were quite clear. But it is important to remember that those results mainly reflect the failure of the more, let's say, liberal progressive bloc to organize itself in a sophisticated political manner. And the result does not reflect a numerical advantage that Netanyahu has. I go back to the battle between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. In the popular vote, she won, but the political, bottom line was quite clear. This is the same case in Israel. We, the Democratic camp, we didn't win in the popular vote, but basically we have an equal number of voters that were translated, unfortunately, to a solid, homogenic, and strong majority of the right-wing ultra-Orthodox bloc. Another element of the political background, and then I will say something about the legal challenge. Another element we need to keep in mind, and again, Israel is not unique in that sense. We see it in other European countries and Western societies. It is not only a right-wing ultra-Orthodox government. This is the first time we experience the massive rise of the ultra-right, the ultra-nationalist right, the disciples of Kahana, political groups that for decades were banned not only by the Zionist left, were banned also by the Likud itself when it was led by Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir and others. And suddenly we see that Netanyahu, for political reasons and even ideological reasons, removed this traditional ban over the extreme right. The issue of the homeland security, the growing tension between Jews and Arabs inside sovereign Israel, the failure of the Israeli police to deal with violence, especially in the Israeli Arabic sector, led to a massive political success of the ultra-nationalist groups led by Itamar Ben-Gvir. And when you collect all these elements, you understand that this is definitely not the first time that Israel is led by a right-wing coalition with a very strong presence of the ultra-Orthodox parties, but it is definitely the first time that we can't identify in the Israeli government and coalition real balancing powers. And this is definitely a dramatic political development that we must not ignore. Now,
Gilad, sorry to come in to interrupt you. I'm just wondering, because I'm aware of the time that you have, whether you could talk a little bit about the challenges on the attacks on the judiciary, and maybe also give a little bit of background for people to understand why is this happening suddenly, or it seems to be happening suddenly. Here.
I'll start by saying that it doesn't happen suddenly, and people need to understand. And again, we saw similar attacks on the judicial branch in many other democracies. Young and old. Okay, we saw it in Hungary, we saw it in Poland, we saw it years ago in Argentina, we saw it in Brazil, we saw it in a way in the US, and this was part of the Israeli political discourse in the last years, and it was in a way strengthened by the personal story of Netanyahu that became to be a crusade of his political camp. Okay? And it's important to understand that those thoughts, plans, this political public discourse existed in Israel for a few years, and suddenly, because of the results of the last round, they have the opportunity to start and implement it. Now, if this government survive, and please keep in mind that usually Israeli governments doesn't survive the entire term, and if I can be a prophet, although it's not a good use of the wisdom of our sages, as you know, but if I can be a prophet, I need to say I don't think that this government will hold on for 4 years, okay? But it is clear that if they have a long term, they will address some critical, dramatic issues, not only the authority of the judicial branch. They will do things in the area of religion and state, and Anna will address it also in regard to the status of, of our rights in Israel, but they took a decision to start with the judicial branch. Now, I assume some of you are lawyers, some of you are rabbis, maybe some of you are lawyers and rabbis, but the most, I assume the majority are not familiar, with all the legal terms, so I will try to minimize it to the 3 main risks we face, okay? The first risk is that they are trying, in a way, to reverse the constitutional era of Israel. 30 years ago, and I'm not going into details, but basically 30 years ago, Israel, led by its Supreme Court, adopted a constitutional concept. Why concept? Because we don't have a full written constitution. But the Israeli Supreme Court understood the basic laws of human dignity, the basic law of human dignity and freedom, as a basic law that brings Israel to a constitutional era in which the Israeli Supreme Court can overrule or cancel parliament legislation that is breaching fundamental human rights. Now, 90% of all democracies around the world, and in that regard, the UK is an exception, okay? And Canada is an exception, and New Zealand is an exception. But the vast majority of democracies around the world are constitutional democracies that have this mechanism that not only the government is limited by the court, the ruling of the courts, also the parliament, when they legislate extreme bad laws, okay? They are trying to reverse it. And this is the first risk. And when you keep in mind that they have a majority in the parliament, it is clear that after they reverse this constitutional reform, they will allow themselves to legislate laws that breach fundamental human rights like freedom of religion. Okay? The second risk has to do with the way we elect judges. Right? Now, there aren't two democracies in the world that elect the judges in the same similar way. Okay? All countries have a unique model of how to elect judges. And Israel had for 75 years its own unique model that brought together the Supreme Court judges, representatives of the government, representatives of the Knesset, and representatives of the Israeli bar. And in order to appoint judges to the Supreme Court, a consensus must be achieved between the different players. This was the Israeli concept for 75 years. Now they are trying to change the system and to give the government the full ability to appoint the judges. Now, yes, they keep some representatives of the Supreme Court and the parliament, but in the end, the new system they're trying to push forward is a system that the government is electing the judges without any procedure of approval from the parliament like we have in the US when the president elects or appoints the judges, but he needs the approval of the Senate, and not always the president and the Senate are under the control of the same party, okay? Now, just think about the long-term outcome of enabling a government to appoint all the judges. Okay, we saw it in Poland. We saw it in Hungary. The last thing that they are trying to do, and I'm close to end my remarks. The third element vis-a-vis the judicial authority is that they are trying not only to minimize the supervision of the Constitutional Court, the Israeli Supreme Court, over legislation, which was implemented only 22 times in the last 30 years. It's not that the Israeli Supreme Court is canceling Knesset legislation every day, but not only they're trying to reset the relations between the parliament and the court, they are also trying in different ways to minimize the supervision of the courts over the acts of the executive branch of the government. And when you bring those elements together, you understand that the current reform would lower down dramatically the constitutional protection over human rights in Israel and the ability of the courts to set red lines in front of the government, the politicians, and the Knesset. Now, my closing, if you allow me, Leah, I want to say a few sentences about the chances of defeating this dangerous reform, because it has to do with Anna's presentation, I'm sure. Look, when democracy is becoming weaker, all citizens in the end suffer from it. All citizens. And there are massive warnings of the leading economists in Israel and the leading figures in the high-tech industry and the leading figure in the security industry in Israel, real acts of warning that it will end with bad results. But we also know that always the first to suffer are the minority groups. And when we are talking in Israel about minority groups, we are talking about Israeli Arabs. We are talking about the LGBTQ community. We are talking about Israeli women, that although they are the majority, their legal status is the status of, unfortunately, of a minority, especially in Israel, with the way our domestic laws are ruled by the Rabbanut, the chief rabbinate, and it also about the liberal communities, the religious liberal communities, meaning us. And we need to keep it in mind. Now, in order to warn us all that we need to do something, but at the same time to remind ourselves that we have the ability to impact the situation, I want to share with you that from a perspective of 35 years of involvement in Israeli civil society and in different ways in Israeli politics, I want you to know that we are now watching, or we are part of the largest civil protest Israel ever had. And its strength is being shown by the fact that this is not an organized protest, that it's not about a protest led by a party or a huge NGO. It's a popular wave of protest, and every day it grows now. And I can tell you from the inside of Israeli politics that Netanyahu is troubled by this wave of protest. And what we need to do is to enlarge this wave of protest, to make sure that the momentum of growth continues, that more and more Israeli sectors and players join the protest. And in that regard, it is extremely important to support. And this is the introduction for Anna's presentation. Our movement in Israel is playing an important role in this protest. Anna will share with you that in many ways we are the leading religious movement in this protest. I can tell you that our youth movement is one of the few youth movements that already joined the protest. Our rabbis, Anna, I will not take Anna's presentation because thank God she is the CEO of the Israeli movement and not me anymore. But the IMPJ and the Israeli Religious Action Center really need the ideological, and I am willing to say also the financial support in order to be able to create an impact as part of this protest. The other thing we need, Rabbi Mühlstein is the president of Arzenu, our international Zionist alliance. We need to strengthen Arzenu. We need to make sure that the local branches of Arzenu and Arzenu as an international umbrella have the ability to present a progressive Zionist voice saying that this is not only an anti-democratic reform, this is an anti-Zionist reform. And we are the ones that can say it around the Jewish world. And the last thing we need is we need you to take part in this protest. Now, I know that you are much more polite than the average Israelis. But friends, I'm begging you, this is the time to become a little bit Israelis. We need you in front of the Israeli embassies. I don't know if you know, but Israelis overseas are already protesting in front of the Israeli embassies. We need you to join them. Don't be afraid. This is not an anti-Israeli move. This is a pro-Israeli move to stand today in front of the Israeli embassies and to march for Israel's democracy. We need you to call the ambassadors, and they will take the call from you. Call them, send them an email, tell them that you are you can't sleep at night because of the news coming from Israel. That you demand them to echo back to Jerusalem your frustration and your distress from the current developments. I'm telling you, you have a voice in Israel. I'm telling you that you can create an impact, or to join us in creating an impact by demanding Netanyahu to remember that when you emphasize the fact that the state of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, it comes with some duties. One of them is to hear the voice of the diaspora Jewry, and we need you in that regard.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Gilad. I know you have to run off because you do have very important business to attend to. And thank you for all you are doing, fighting every day. I know it's not easy. You're the last man standing of the Zionist left, right? Literally, unfortunately.
The last man, not the last woman.
Luckily not the last woman, indeed. But thank you so much. We weren't able to take the questions for you, but Anna and I will do our best to hopefully
I'm
also
sure.
answer the questions that were posed to you. Thank you again, Gilad.
Shabbat shalom, friends.
Shabbat shalom. So it's my pleasure. We didn't actually introduce Gilad. So while he's disconnecting, maybe I'll just quickly, for those who might have joined us, who are not already very familiar with Rabbi Gilad Kariv, member of Knesset for Avodah, just a few words. Rabbi Gilad Kariv, previously the CEO of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, now a member of Knesset for Avodah. As you can hear, as you heard, a true supporter, a true member, a true leader of our movement in Israel. And he left big shoes to fill when he moved from the IMPJ to the Knesset. But with Anna Kislanski, we have found a very worthy person to fill his shoes. And so, Anna, it's my pleasure to hand over to you as the chief executive of our Israeli sister movement to share with us a little bit more about specifically the challenges to progressive Reform Judaism in Israel under this new government. One of the questions that was posed is whether you can say a few words, including in your remark about the law of return and acceptance of non-Orthodox conversions,
Sure.
as well as things around the Western Wall as well. So those were themes that came up in some of the questions. But first of all, maybe you can pick up where Gilad left off, of the place that your movement is playing in the demonstrations at the moment, and maybe you can move on to those threats against progressive.
Of course. Toda raba, Leah. Gilad already mentioned your leadership and your friendship with our movement and working on our behalf in the national institutions and on other arenas. So thank you for everyone for being here. And just by being here, showing your concern and support for both our movement in Israel and the state of Israel. I have to say one or two sentences about Gilad, my teacher and rabbi, even though he's already not here, but he's been doing a work on our behalf in the Reform movement as the leader of the Israeli Reform movement. And then he moved to the Knesset, and showing Gilad's work day by day in the Knesset, working for democracy, and knowing that, you know, he's someone from us is also very strengthening our work in times of success. And I'm going to say several words about that as well. And in times of stress, and of course we are in a stressful time. So I just really wanted to, in Hebrew you say, you don't say good words about a person in his face, and he left. So even though I would have loved to do that. So just a few words of where we are in terms of our movement. So I'm just going to start with just personally. It seems natural for you, maybe, as you think about our movement as a pluralistic movement, to immediate as a liberal movement, working for Tikkun Olam, and with the excellent work of Iraq, fighting for pluralism in Israel. So it seemed natural for us to join the protest, and we did. But I do want to share that the idea of coming for our people from the movement, leaving the synagogue to the public sphere and protesting is not so, it's not that easy. I mean, think about it. We protest every day. Being a Reform congregation in Israel, being a woman putting on a talit every Shabbat, and not just in front of, not just on Rosh Chodesh at the Western Wall, in Israel is also a matter of protest. But it's a different kind of protest. It's a protest that not everyone views as a protest, because many people come to our synagogues for religious services. They want to sit together, they want to pray together, they want their kids to have their b'nai mitzvah in our synagogues. And so up until, I'd say, the last elections, we were feeling that we were on a very successful wave. We more than doubled the amount of our congregations. You'd look at our at surveys that we held, just surveying the general Israeli public, where people, 8% out of the general Jewish population would identify with the Reform movement. So we felt pretty strong. And then the last government before this government came on, there were several interesting achievements, even though they were there for a very short time. For instance, opening a department for diaspora affairs for Israel, for Jewish pluralistic activities within the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. So, and this department and it was also thanks to the work of Gilad Kariv and Nachman Shai. So we were feeling that we were more and more accepted by the consensus, the Israeli consensus. And suddenly we're feeling that everything that we've worked for, that Iraq worked for, in terms of their achievements with religion and state, are under threat. And I'm going to talk about these threats in a moment. So even though it's not so simple to leave the synagogue and go and protest, we decided to join the protest. And we did. So you'll see, if you're coming to Tel Aviv in the next 10 days or so, in the center of the Kaplan Street, next to the complex of Sarona, where the largest demonstration is happening, and now there are demonstrations all over Israel, you'll see a large billboard that is a billboard that we put up, and it says, "In the name of Judaism, we will protect democracy." And when you're looking at the people that are joining, the hundreds, that more than 100,000 people demonstrate every Motzei Shabbat all over Israel, you will see that as an organization, we are I'd say the only religious organization that is holding signs with our logo, with our words, saying Jewish and democratic, racism is not my Judaism. And again, in the name of Judaism, we will protect democracy because we believe that it's our Jewish values. We do see religious people protesting that are not just liberal, that are not just part of the streams, but as an organization, as a movement, you'd find mostly our signs, and then many other civil society organizations. What Gilad mentioned about our youth movement, then our youth movement and several other youth movements, but our youth movement is also, I mean, the idea of teenagers going to protest is also not something we're taking for granted, because you need their parents to agree to that, and not everyone is comfortable with that. Our pre-army program, our Mechina program, we have a gap year in Israel for Israelis, where 18-year-olds defer their army service for a year, and they volunteer, and they learn, and they pray, and they live together as a community, both in Jaffa and Tel Aviv. They are a leading force in the protest of all the mechinot, of all the other gap years that are choosing to join the protests. So I believe I started with answering your question, Leah, but I also, if it's okay with you, and then we can go back to what else we're doing and what else we can do. I want to explain how this change affects our movement, and it has a direct effect on our movement. Part of the reasons that we were able to achieve and thrive, and especially in the last decade, were thanks to the help of the Israeli Supreme Court. Whenever there was a discrimination, we were able to prove discrimination against our movement and against the conservative movement through the Supreme Court. And it took years, but every time we took the states to court, or we took other organizations and people that we were able to prove discrimination to court, we knew that we're going to win. We knew that the Supreme Court, that the legal system in Israel will be able to protect us. So in 2012, many of you know and remember, after a battle that took 7 years, we won the Miri Gold case, where the Supreme Court made the state, for the first time in history, pay for the salaries of rabbis, of non-Orthodox rabbis in regional municipalities. Most of our congregations are not in regional municipalities. Regional municipalities in Israel are the regions of kibbutzim and moshavim. But thanks to that, that was a precedent. We were able to establish 13 more new congregations in regional municipalities where the rabbis' salaries, or I'd say about 60% of the rabbis' salaries, were paid by the state of Israel, thanks to the Supreme Court. Our conversions, you know, and I want to emphasize that, because I learned that not everyone knows that. The conversions that both the Reform movement and the conservative movement perform in Israel are recognized by the Ministry of Interior Affairs. So that if someone is converted by our movement to Judaism, they're considered Jews by the state of Israel. And this wasn't always the case. We were able to win this case several years ago, but thanks to that, we now perform about 10% of all conversions in Israel. So because and people choose to convert with us because they don't need to lie about the way they choose to live their lives. And their children, if we're talking about gay couples who choose to adopt or go through a process of bring kids to the world through surrogacy, then they choose to take their kids and have them converted with our movement. Obviously, they won't be able to go to the Rabbanut, to the Orthodox establishment to do a halachic conversion. And so we get more and more requests for these conversions and giyurim. And now it's under threat. It's not under threat only because it's in the coalition agreement. They put it in the coalition agreement that they want to change the law of conversion so that it's going to be only one conversion law, one Orthodox conversion law, but also because of the changes that might happen to the legal system. Once they will be able to pass the override clause where 61 members of Knesset will be able to pass a law, and this law might contradict a Supreme Court verdict, then this law would override the Supreme Court verdict. So what if they decide to override the Supreme Court verdict saying that they should support, that the state should support our rabbis in regional municipalities, or to pass the national conversion law, or to pass other laws that are not so good to minorities. And there are other examples, again, because of our work, we were able to get funding from other ministries in Israel, like the Ministry of Education. This government, again, based on the coalition agreements, were decided to basically dismantle the Ministry of Education. So the department that was supporting our programs, our school-to-school programs with kids from Israel and kids from the diaspora, is now under the department of Orit Struk. And Orit Struk is a very extreme minister in one of the ministries of Israel. Avi Maoz, and I'm sure you've heard the name, is one of the most extreme and I'd say narrow-minded MKs that is leading the Noam party, and a very right-wing ultra-Orthodox party. And he got a special ministry in the ministry of the prime minister or something like that. And again, one of the other departments of the education, of the Ministry of Education, is now under Avi Maoz's ministry. And that department is overseeing other educational programs that we're getting. We used to get funding from the Ministry of Education. So
sorry to interrupt, Anna. I think I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about kind of why this matters so much about the education initiative, that it's not just, right, because it's not just a question of, well, we'll get less funding to do this, but just say a little bit more, because I'm not sure everyone is necessarily familiar with that.
Right, of course. So the education system in Israel works that you have a general curriculum, but also every school can choose other activities and other informal curriculum. And that curriculum is offered by different NGOs around Israel. So many of them choose our curriculum, but I'll give you other examples. There's an organization called Choshen, and this organization is an educational organization working in schools to talk about the LGBTQ identity, and just to educate about what they're doing, and this is obviously Avi Maoz created a blacklist where he put in all the organizations that he sees as a threat to the education of young Israelis, and Choshen is one of those organizations. And of course, the Reform movement is also in the same blacklist of the Noam Party and Avi Maoz. And there are other pluralistic, Jewish pluralistic organizations like Bina and other NGOs that are well known in Israel, well respected in Israel, and they are all together with us under a threat. So that's why it's obviously threatening not just to our movement, but just from our own subjective perspective, it's really unsettling and obviously disturbing. And of course, all of it has to do with the legal coup that Gilad spoke about earlier. They're basically trying to take away all the things that were protecting minorities in Israel and also protecting us. So again, it's the conversion law, and even the grandchild clause, right? Everyone in the diaspora expressed their concern about it, and it's really concerning. The Jewish state, who has power, makes a decision for all the Jewish people about who's Jewish and who's not Jewish, who's eligible to step foot in the Jewish state and get citizenship and who's not. They're deciding for us. They're deciding for my family, who made Aliyah from Russia and from Ukraine, whether they will be able to set foot in Israel or not. It's really disturbing. So we're fighting, and our people are fighting. And I think what Gilad mentioned about you having a voice is critical for our success. I think that you'll get MKs coming to, or government officials coming to your country. And we all know that they will want to meet with you. So think about who you're willing to meet with, who you're not willing to meet with. I'm not saying not meet with any government official. I think there are MKs and government and ministers that you should meet with, and they should hear your stories and your thoughts and about Israel. They should recognize your leadership. Just criticism, it doesn't mean that you're not Zionist. It doesn't mean that you don't support the state of Israel. It's really important. It's really important for us. And it's not just talking to and having demonstration in front of the Israeli embassies. It's also very important, but also writing to your government officials and trying to affect people from your government from saying something to Bibi Netanyahu or to the Israeli ambassador, and to other representatives of the Israeli government, because they are watching, they are listening, they are taking into consideration what's written in the press. It's also very important that something, there was a threat on our several weeks ago, again, by the Israeli new government, that they wanted to take away budgets from the public, from Kan, the public broadcasting channel in Israel, which is an excellent channel. One thing that I hope will not change, and I'm really fearful for, is the media. The Israeli press is pretty strong. They don't let everything that is going on in Israel to go under the radar. And doesn't matter if you're left wing or right wing, you're still listening to Galei Tzahal and to other broadcasting channels, even though we have some channels and newspapers that are very identified with with Bibi. I'd say this.
So we are going to end on time, but and before we end, I do want to have an opportunity to say really clearly of how people can give, either by donating or by lending their voice. And we want to make sure that we put the links in the chat, and we'll email those out as well. But I just wanted to see if we can maybe cover two more of the questions that were posed in the chat. So one question is more of a general question around the attitudes of secular Israelis towards religion. That Lucia wrote that she had often heard that many of the secular Israelis don't really want to hear anything about progressive Judaism because they're so fed up with the rabbinate, with the rabbanot, that they don't even want to hear about religion. And she's wondering if there has been a change in that attitude in recent years. And I think, and then there's a question which I think is really important for us to address, which is the question around the Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Shikli, of whether he's a person to meet or to reject. So maybe you could just very briefly cover those 2 points as well, before we wrap up.
Yes, of course. So I think that observing the fact that there are some secular Israelis that, because of the bad name to Judaism, right, or to Jewish religion, that the ultra-Orthodox are doing, they might disengage with Judaism. But and this demonstrates the polarity that is now within the Israeli society. The whole idea of pluralism and of our movement and the conservative movement and other Jewish pluralistic organizations, this is what we're trying to fight. That I think that being secular and anti-religion or I'd say any kind of religious expression is pouring the baby with the water. So I definitely don't agree with that. And in fact, I think the term secular, I don't think it's most of the secular in Israel. I think the term secular for Israelis is totally different than the term secular outside of Israel, because even secular Israelis, they celebrate the Jewish holidays. They do everything according to the Jewish calendar. They rest on Shabbat. Sometimes they even act as Reform Jews. But I think that most of the seculars they're anti-Orthodox establishment. They're not so much anti-religion. And actually, the people who join our congregations, who participate in our services and in our programs, are coming from a secular background. I came from a secular background. So, and Gilad and many of the leaders of the Israeli reform movement, because our movement is so young in Israel, we did not necessarily grow up in a synagogue, but each of us has in their own journey, have decided to choose and become a religious liberal Jew. So I think that's the story of many of the people who join our congregations. I want to say a few words about Shikli. So yes, you should definitely meet with Amichai Shikli. Amichai Shikli is not racist like Ben Gvir or Smotrich. However, he is he's very strong-minded regarding politics, and is very much right-wing in his views of I'd say in the Hebrew you say shalom ve'bitachon, right? Peace and security issues. But when it comes to liberal Judaism and pluralistic Judaism, he grew up at kibbutz Hanaton, which is a conservative kibbutz. He doesn't define himself as a conservative Jew, but he's definitely pluralistic, and he's definitely open to liberal Judaism. He has his criticism, which is not necessarily coming from really knowing liberal Jews, and especially liberal Jews outside of Israel. And he's the Minister of Diaspora Affairs. So and he's open, I think, since he has no choice but to take into consideration Jews and Jewish and views of Jews from the diaspora, he has to work with you. He has to meet with you. So since he's going to be reaching out to you, or people from his ministry are going to be reaching out to you, this is the time to meet with him, to educate him, and also to share with him your concerns about where Israel is going. How are you going to keep pluralistic Judaism and liberal Judaism alive in Israel when all this craziness is happening? So he's definitely a person to have a dialogue with. And another very interesting character in Israeli politics in the government is Amir Ohana. Amir Ohana is the chair of the Knesset. He has a lot of power, but he's gay, and his kids that he brought to the world through a surrogate process were converted by a conservative rabbi outside of Israel, but they've been through a liberal conversion. So on one hand, it gets us really mad because both him and Shikli, they're, all for the terrible legal reforms that are harming us. But on the other hand, they're in power, they're in the government. Unfortunately, they are basically the only moderate voices in this government. So, and Bibi, but Bibi's, he might not know, but he's already in prison. So his hands are tied because he wants to protect himself.
Thank you. What a good note to end on. Bibi already in prison, but yeah. Just before we
metaphorically.
Just before we do, and before we hand over to the president of the EUPJ, Miriam Kramer, I just want to say, take one quick moment to say, I posted it in the chat, but I just wanted to say it so that people hear it. The Choose Democracy campaign launched today from the UK, but it is open globally. It's all the Arzenu UK is a signatory to the campaign, Liberal Judaism, Reform Judaism, Masorti Judaism in the UK. And we're really trying to encourage individuals to sign on, to pledge their success, to be a virtual demonstration. We're trying really hard before Shabbat to get to 1,000 signatures. So if all of you sign up, we have another 180 or so. That would be really excellent. Invite your friends as well. Spread the message, choosedemocracy.org.uk. And then very importantly, and I wanted to give Anna the last word on this before we hand over to Miriam, the IMPJ, we hear the attacks are happening. Billboards don't come for free. The IMPJ is launching an emergency funding campaign. Anna, do you want to just say a few words so that people can look out for when the campaign launches?
Of course. So we're going to be launching it in really a few days now. And because we definitely understand that we need to do a lot of campaigning for the fight for democracy, both IMPJ and Iraq. This is a joint campaign working together to keep Israel democratic. We will definitely need funding for it, for billboards, for videos, for an educational curriculum to youth movements, and mostly informal, and to educate the Israeli public. And of course, we are in a place where about 14% of our budget is coming from government ministries. And as I mentioned before, that funding is now under threat. So we're hoping by this campaign also to substitute some of our predicted losses. So thank you for the opportunity, Leah, to mention it. We're not taking it for granted. And thank you for your support for that.
Thank you. Over to you, Miriam.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have the very last word. On behalf of the more than 200 people who tuned into this extraordinarily informative and provocative webinar, I'd like to thank you, both the organizers, Rabbi Sylvia Rothschild and Leah Mühlstein, to the two lead speakers, Anna Kislanski and Rabbi Gilad Kariv. We were a global audience, and we thank you very much.